Hello and welcome to the final lecture in strategic management around the execution phase of strategic planning. So, fundamentals around strategic execution. Surveys of executives have showcased they feel that over 60% of strategies are not properly executed. There's various reasons for this. One is poor planning. Others are a lack of motivation in the workforce to keep a strategy going. Others are miscommunication, and later in this lecture, we will discuss other factors into why strategies fail in the execution phase. Execution is a discipline, it's an integral part of strategy. It takes time for companies to develop execution as an overall core capability or discipline in their company. It takes multiple strategies to ultimately allow a company to form a culture and operation method to actually be able to execute a strategy. No strategy is worthwhile without the ability of a company to execute it. Therefore, during the planning phase of strategy, it must come to fruition that the analysis and the research and the ultimate ROI for the strategy comes into play before you decide to execute it. Execution of strategy is one of the top responsibilities of any business leader. Business leaders all the time are set on working on multiple strategic initiatives for any company or department. It is very important that business leaders not only understand what's going on in this strategy, but also how it's being executed and working with their teams to ensure that bottlenecks or challenges or barriers are removed so the execution of a strategy can come to fruition. Business leaders are also the ones who comprehensively understand the dynamics of the business, the people, processes, and resources needed to execute a strategy. So we talked about planning, right? And in the planning phase of strategy, developing a strategic plan, you need to do both internal and external analysis, research, and assessment of what you need to actually execute the strategy. During the execution phase, it is on managers and business leaders to ensure that things are moving along smoothly. That people understand their roles and what they're supposed to be doing, to motivate them to ensure that they're motivated to do the job, that they have the tools and resources and also training they need as well. Without an oversight of all those things and understanding what's going on, strategies can fail if things are not moving in all different parts of the kind of strategic plan and pieces of the puzzle. Execution of strategies must be at the core of a company's culture. For companies to be successful over time, they are ones who are able to develop strategies and, and know how to execute them. Now, not all strategies are successful, but the ones that are more successful than not, it's about building a track record, being consistent in your strategic execution. And that should be at the company's core of their culture because they want to be able to be known as a company who achieves overall the most of their goals. The strategic execution phase isn't defined as just getting the job done. It articulates the how and when the job will get done. So execution isn't just doing the job. It's actually articulating how we're going to do it and when it's going to be accomplished. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. A strategy can fail if a business leader and team don't understand how to approach the strategy. So before you hit the go button and go to market or go execute the strategy, clear goals, guidance, and processes mitigate this if they're established up front during the planning phase and right before you execute the strategy. Everybody must be on board. Everybody must understand their roles, and everybody must understand how they contribute in the overall mission of the strategy. But there are strategic execution challenges. These are common things that happen in companies where they struggle to actually execute their strategies. Insufficient partner buy-in. In the strategic planning phase, it's very important for firm leaders to get all of the counterparts, all of the different departments and stakeholders on board before they actually execute. If you execute a strategy without the right stakeholders bought in and partnering in alignment and support that strategy, well, it's going to be a lot harder to go to them later to ask for support if they didn't already support the initial concept and plan of the strategy. You want to make sure everybody's on the same page up front. Insufficient leadership attention. Too often, firm leaders view the strategy development process as linear or a finite initiative. So what this really means is that leadership at times just wants the job to get done and don't participate in the overall planning or execution of strategy. Maybe they get updates They don't really participate to really get involved to figure out how can they influence the process? How can they influence to remove bottlenecks or challenges or barriers? Leadership needs to be involved and they need to pay attention to what's going on. That also goes into ineffective leadership. Perhaps these are leaders who know what's going on, but don't know how to actually balance the workload and balance what's going on in the company to ensure strategies are executed. Sometimes it's saying, you know what, we need to focus our efforts on this and prioritize the work for their company. So therefore, people aren't working on too many things at once. Because at some point, if you have too many things going on in the company, some things never get done, or they're not done in its complete value that it should bring to the organization. Times a strategic execution is based off a weak or inappropriate strategy. Sometimes it's okay to say, no, now's not the time to execute this strategy, or we need to wait to execute this strategy at the time it makes sense for the company based on various dynamics. Maybe the market, maybe you don't have the financial capital to execute at this time. But you want to make sure when you execute, it's the right time with the right support before you start. Another big component we'll talk about is the resistance to change. This is where the topic of change management comes in and what it means to handle change management during the strategic execution phase. There are a lot of employees in some companies who don't want to change what they do for the future of the company. They get uncomfortable or they get kind of leery a little bit worried about what the change means to them versus why they should change for the better value of the company. When it comes to change management, here are some tips for how to conduct change management and essentially how to have your team buy into the strategy. First, it needs to start at the top. The leaders of any strategy need to be the ones to articulate why the strategy is going to happen. What is the ultimate goal of the strategy and provide exact clarity on the exact team members' responsibilities and also what value their responsibilities are to bringing to the strategy to fruition and ultimately what value the strategy brings to the customer and the company. Managers also need to be the ones to adopt the changes and to lead the changes with their efforts as well. They can't just speak to it, they have to take action. And as we know, it's more of a role model mentality. Leaders need to be role models to their employees. As a leader or even as an employee, you must ask for feedback even before you begin. Ask for feedback early before you execute the strategy to ensure that you're clear on the expectations of your role and what your contribution is to the strategy. It's very important for all employees to be clear on what their responsibilities are up front. And if you are not sure about what you're supposed to be doing or unclear about an aspect of your contribution to a strategy, ask. It's better to ask early than ask later when results start to come in and there's some type of execution issue midstream. Companies and leaders must define exactly what the change is and must be crystal clear. We're going to execute this strategy for these reasons, and this is the goal, and these are the things you as an employee need to understand about your role to the strategy. Without that very clear definition, employees will get confused and not understand at some point in the strategic execution what ultimately is the priority. However, the message should be clear and very simple. So simplify, simplify, simplify. The message must be clear and concise and not too overwhelming to where it can cause confusion and also cause some type of worry in the employee that they're not going to be able to get the job done and overcomplicate the situation. It is very important for leaders to articulate that the change isn't just about bottom line numbers. Employees don't always want to just talk about what it is for the company to bring profitability to the organization. Employees want to know what other value is the strategy bringing besides just profit. Profit's good, it's what employees understand is important to generate, but it's also about what value does it bring to the team, what type of opportunity does it bring to the organization for long term growth, and other things. Also, it's very important to motivate your team, not just to have them buy in and support and align that they understand and agree to the strategic plan that they're about to execute. But as they're executing, as they're performing the functions of the job to get the job done, implement some type of formal recognition program, perhaps an award system, a bonus, some type of team building exercise, just something along the way to ensure that employees are motivated, That's why it's very important during the execution phase to build milestones. Like we talked about the strategy to performance gap. Well, during that, you're actually going to develop milestones and measurement of success. During the strategic execution phase, as you hit each milestone, perhaps you actually are achieving success along the way and you're providing some type of recognition program. But it doesn't always hurt either as a change management leader to just tell your team they're doing a good job once in a while. A little can go a long way. And ultimately, what's very important to understand during the change management phase of a strategic execution is never stop communicating. Employees should never stop communicating with their management team, and the management team should never stop communicating with their employees. Make sure everybody has an opportunity to express what's going on, the successes, the failures, the struggles, the challenges, the opportunities that they see. As long as there's clear, open communication, a strategy has a much better chance to be executed. I encourage you to watch this change management video. It explains in more detail techniques around change management, and these are questions to consider as you watch it. So 10 key steps of strategic execution, okay? So what really matters at this point is that you take the entire plan and bring it to reality. First, as you have the plan identified and the ultimate goal, you need to visualize it. It's kind of like saying you're in the huddle, you're in the locker room before the big game, and you're about to visualize what it's going to be like to get on the field and play the game. Then you need to have measurements of success. As we talked about, it's very important to build out what are your KPIs? What are your key metrics? How are you going to measure the strategy? And at what point are you going to ultimately measure the trends of what's going on? And as you do that, you're reporting the progress. You're letting your key stakeholders know the progress so far. We're trending in the right direction, or we're not trending in the right direction, or it's too close to call, or maybe things are moving along just fine, but you need to make sure you report that progress. Because along the way during the execution phase, you will be faced with decisions that you didn't know you may have to make during the planning phase, or there are variables and considerations that you thought might be barriers that come up, and this is where you need to look and make decisions as a team what you need to do. It's very important too during the step of making a decision as you're reporting out the progress that those who have the decision rights are very clear, that you know who to go to make the ultimate decision at some point in the project. Step 5, identify strategy projects. What this means is those milestones. Maybe call them mini projects or just smaller projects for the ultimate strategy, okay? Perhaps your organization has an ultimate strategy they're working on, but there's various different projects that roll up to the ultimate strategy. Different departments could be working on different components of a strategy, and that's what that means. But they must be aligned. They must be all very much in that value chain system like we talked about. That one department doing one piece of the strategy, and it equally makes sense that it can transfer over to the other department, that the departments are all working towards the same thing. And then ultimately you have to manage your projects, right? You have to make sure it's within budget, it's on time, your resources are producing. That's ultimately fundamental project management. And then communicate. Communicate at the beginning of the strategy, letting people know you're about to do this. During the execution phase, though, it's about communicating the progress. All right. And that's not just communicating it within your company, it's communicating it perhaps with your customers or the media or stakeholders, external partners. Everybody needs to understand how the strategy is going. And there's a level of information that most strategies need to be comfortable to share. It's very important too. It's very important to align individual roles. Every team member needs to understand exactly what their responsibilities are, and also understand their partners in the team and their team players' responsibilities as well. So they clearly know who to work with on what component of a strategy. And then at the end of the day, like we talked about, reward performance. And again, even if the strategy doesn't come to fruition or you don't meet your goal, or perhaps it fails, and it's okay to learn from failure, by the way. Companies who are successful at times have strategies that do fail. You can still reward performance in that you can still praise for doing a good job. You can still say, look, we did our best and we tried, but thank you for your efforts. and you did the best you could under the circumstances into which we were faced with. That's still rewarding performance. But ultimately, rewarding performance could be monetary, could be a bonus, something to recognize the team. That's what keeps teams motivated. At the end of the day, one of the two key things about strategic execution is making sure it's clear on what people are supposed to do, but it's also keeping them motivated on what they're doing. The first core process of execution, again, is planning. So this is where we tie up the entire planning to execution process. This ties in everything we pretty much talked about in the last couple of lectures. Again, remember, planning is all about defining where the business wants to go. All right. As you identify your problem, what is your business need? What is the ultimate customer value proposition? What is the best way to grow profitability? What is our competitive landscape? Can this business execute the strategy? What are the important milestones of hitting the strategic plan? Is the plan scattered or sharply focused? Remember, your strategy must be clearly focused and very direct. And then between the people, processes, and even technology, is it all clear? This is a very straightforward slide about everything we've talked about this semester. All of these things must be vetted out as you define what strategy is in your company. That's the first core step. The second step is understanding your people. People are very essential to the execution of a strategy. Why? Because ultimately they're the ones who are going to do the job to get it done. All right. So it's very important that you first, in the green bubble, link strategic plan to results. Make sure everybody understands what the KPIs are and the metrics, and make sure that people are working towards some type of quantifiable number that they can understand they're working towards. Because if you don't have a clear metric or clear objective, people at times don't always work and perform at their best capacity because they want to be motivated by something. Develop a leadership pipeline. What's good about focusing on your people as well is that in strategic execution, you can build a succession plan for your upcoming leadership. Now, this is where you identify your top talent and individuals you want to lead projects and give them the opportunity to build and also execute a strategy to give them an opportunity to develop their skills to become the next generation of leaders. But what's really hard during the execution phase, though, is to look at those who are not performing. Okay. And it's very important to identify early on if someone's not doing their job good enough and not helping to contribute productivity to execute the strategy well, you're going to have to figure out, well, do I even either move that person or replace them with someone else or ultimately get rid of them? Because you can't have a non-performer disrupting the business to get the job done. Or perhaps you train them. You find an opportunity to train if you have time in your execution phase to do it. The third critical step is the overall operation. The operation of your execution must be robust. Everything must link together, right? You know who's doing what technology is supporting what piece of the execution. You also have a clear path for how work streams are going to be done, a good reporting mechanism, a good communication mechanism. The entire achievement of your execution is all about how everything moves together, okay? I'll let you read the bullet points in detail, but at the end of the day, the entire plan that you developed must now be put into fruition, put into action, and the operation must be in sync and must have a very clear path forward. One essential lever of strategic execution is ensuring that decision rights are made. This ensures everyone in the team knows which decisions and actions they are responsible for. We do not want to execute a strategy where we don't understand who to go to in the time of need to make a decision. Execution phases also have somewhat smaller processes that need approvals or feedback. Those individuals need to be assigned early on to understand that you're responsible for this piece of the puzzle, this piece of the process. And when a decision needs to be made, you're the one who needs to do it. It's very important that it's encouraged that high-level managers, strategic managers, delegate operational decisions. And it's very important that anybody who's in charge of making a decision understands that they need to make really good sound decisions and they're rarely second guessed. You want to make sure you're good at your decision-making skills during the execution phase of strategy. You want to make sure that you want to have clear guidance that you're providing your employees, that you don't kind of go back and forth on your decision-making. You don't waffle or get flaky on your decision making, because what happens there, it can make an execution of a plan and the actual operation of the business kind of waste time, or it can really cause a disruption to the team, which can cause a failure in the execution. Number two, information flow. Make sure all important competitive information makes it to headquarters quickly. This allows for quick top management decision making to react or proactively work towards strategy to compete with a competitive environment. During the execution phase, it's very important that those who are in the field, those in the front lines, are able to communicate back to headquarters about what they're seeing as they execute the strategy, especially in a large company. You want to have that very much open communication for what's happening. So that way, in the moment, during the execution phase of a strategy, decision makers, managers, the leaders can help work through any of the barriers or obstacles that are in the way. It also helps the field line and lower level employees understand how their day to day functions contribute to the overall bottom line and strategic vision. It also gives those in the front lines the ability to understand the value that they're bringing. It also keeps them motivated, because you hear all the time about how employees in the front line feel like the headquarters don't understand what's going on, or there's a disconnect of what's going on. Well, those who feel like they actually have a voice, who have an opportunity to communicate back to headquarters and top level management, also feel more valued and motivated to execute the strategy because they're part of it. They feel like they're part of a team. This brings us to the midterm prep portion of this video lecture. Your midterm is going to be short essay format. You will be presented with 4 prompts, and you will only have to pick 3 of the 4 to write about. You can pick whichever 3 of the 4 you want to write about. It'll be handwritten, so please remember, bring a blue book the night of the midterm. Again, bring a blue book the night of the midterm. This will be open book, open notes. You can bring your laptop, any resources you need to help you write your essays. I do encourage you, though, to review these topics and concepts and study before the midterm, because you'll need to be familiar with them enough to write during the session that we have. And keep this in mind, that there will be a couple prompts where there's a combination of maybe 1 or 2 of these topics into one question. The first one to be familiar with is the 5 forces. On this one, I'll give a actual company and ask you to write about the 5 forces facing that company and evaluate between the different forces, high, medium, or low. And then I'm going to ask you to pick the one that you believe is the highest force and why that force is the highest force in competition against that company. Next, building vision. The topics of core ideology and BHAGs. In this example, whether a real company or fictitious, I'll present to you a quote. The quote will be a vision statement. I'll want you to both analyze that quote from a BHAG perspective, as in, is it a target-oriented BHAG, competitive, role model, internal transformation? You'll identify what type of BHAG it is and why. And then, what do you believe the core ideology is of that vision statement based on what the context of the vision statement is? The next, reinventing the business model. Here's where I'll give you a case analysis of a company with a current business dilemma. You will talk about what you believe between 1 through 4 here, what type of reinvention of the business model they need to conduct to be able to be competitive again in their business. Is it a customer acquisition or retention strategy, a technological advancement, some type of new filling of a consumer need, or they just need to do something different to be competitive again? I won't ask you to do a whole profit formula, but I will ask you at a high level what types of metrics you believe from a profitability perspective they need to look at. Okay. I will ask you to write up a little bit, though, about who their target customer is in this business model. What is the job overall to be done? What types of key processes and resources should they consider as they reinvent this business model? Again, it's a very brief essay, about 3 to 5 paragraphs, on what type of business model reinvention they should consider, and overall, what are the people and processes and technology they should consider to build out a value proposition for that strategy. I'll explain more in class as well. But just be familiar with the fundamentals of this chart and you should be in shape. The value chain. Again, or know what a value chain is. Know the interdependencies of what a value chain means when it comes to strategy. If you get that down, you'll be fine because I'll give you an example of a company and tell you about one department into which this strategy is going to be the overall department that's going to execute it, right? Perhaps it's a sales and distribution strategy. Well, in this example, I'm going to have you think about what does that do to impact the other departments and what type of dependencies do you think the other departments are going to have on the sales and distribution piece for this strategy. A lot of these essays, by the way, are going to be assumption based insights that you're going to provide. I don't expect you to spend a lot of time doing in depth research, but I do expect you to provide your critical thoughts and assumptions based on the material that we've covered in class. The next is the strategy planning piece, where it's a strategy to performance gap. I'm going to give you an example where there's a disconnect between the actual reality of the plan to what's really going on in the plan, and you're going to devise up and have to speak through the strategy to performance loop and how do we close the gap on this particular case study on how this company can actually close that gap and become more realistic with their expectations on the performance of the plan. Lastly, trade-offs. There are 8 common trade-off reasons, and I'm going to give you a case analysis prompt where a business manager is going to have to make a decision, option A or B. And then you're going to tell me if you believe they should go down option A or B based on the dynamics of the problem. And I'm not going to penalize you if you pick A or B, actually. I'm fine if you pick either option A or B. But what you're going to have to articulate that I'm going to assess is the trade off decision. So they pick option A. What is that trade off? What are they giving up? And then in return, what are they gaining? If they pick option B, same thing. I'm looking for you to identify what type of trade off it is and also what is going to be the trade off and what are they gaining ultimately to meet the need of their business problem.